Hello everyone, I'm Tracey Arklay from the School of Government and International Relations at Griffith University, and I'm talking here today to Professor John Kane, also from the School of Government in IR, in our series on the US presidential elections in 2016, some issues and perspectives. So John, increasingly it seems that not just in the USA with Trump and with Clinton, but in Australia with Abbott, with Rudd, with Gillard, as well as in the UK, as exemplified, I think, by the Brexit vote. We are constantly hearing in the media that there's this thing called a crisis of leadership. Do you think, John, we have a crisis? And if so, what are some of the problems that are contributing to that crisis?
Crisis is, of course, a very overused term. People use it for all sorts of things. Usually means coming to a critical point, is the patient going to live or die? And it may be overstating the case to call this a crisis, and yet one feels something has changed in the world, and we are at a critical point, politically, not just here, but as you say, different countries around the world, and it does seem to be often put down, again, as you say, to a problem of leadership. The world is in some kind of state in which it seems to have gone beyond the grasp of our political leaders. They seem not to understand how we got in, not to understand where we're going, and there's a consequent reaction from very disgruntled populations around the world, which is throwing up the Trumps and Bernie Sanders and even I was listening to a radio program on the way into this interview was Malcolm Roberts from the One Nation Party. He was talking precisely in these terms. One nation is going to do well at the next election in Queensland. Why? People are absolutely disillusioned with the major parties and the failure of leadership. And he's promising leadership. So it's a typical populist. They've all failed us, and now we're looking for genuine leadership.
You know, the thing that really always fascinates me, though, when you have people like Malcolm Roberts talking about foul leadership, they're failing us. They never talk about solutions. They never talk about, what they could do that's different to what's already happening.
To be fair to Malcolm, he actually did.
Oh, did he?
Have some solutions. The banks are ripping us off. We've got to stop that.
Okay.
Climate change, it's ruining the world. The Green Party is ruining the environment. How's that? How's that so? Because they're not allowing the export of coal or dirty coal to other countries, which is polluting the atmosphere and so forth. So here a whole series of quite positive things. We are going to support coal, not green energy, things that many in our neck of the woods would not agree with, but very positive and possibly appealing to a lot of people who do feel in a typical kind of populist age they've been left behind by the world. The world's going too fast in the wrong direction, and hey, we don't seem to be better off this year than last year, or actually over a generation. And we're dissatisfied. And
I guess that's playing out in the US too.
Absolutely.
Do you think that some of those similar things that we're seeing here in Australia is part of the underlying causes for the dismay of the political leadership that's being offered in the USA in this presidential election?
I think it's pretty much the same thing around the world. We are a globalised environment after all, and what happens in one place is pretty much reflected, give or take. But pretty much it's the same underlying causes, and we've had a very severe financial crisis from which the world has not recovered after 8 years. And we're still in a long period of stagnation. Governments, political leaders have handed over the main response to that to the central banks. And the central banks have no solution apart from printing more money, which doesn't seem to be going anywhere except into the stock market to push up prices. It's not going into investment and real jobs. And even reliable investors like China are slowing down, and we have benefited from the Chinese.
Absolutely.
We're a lucky country, but we've been lucky because not from virtue, but from
cleverness.
But from genuine luck. That's with the tail of the dog,
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah. So, but do we have solutions for unhappiness and people's disgruntlement? Doesn't just come back. People will point out in America, for instance, that actually wages are going up for the first time. People are getting back into jobs, but they're not actually feeling happy. And happiness is not a matter of your absolute level of income or welfare or whatever. It's whether you feel you're going in the right direction, you're going somewhere. I remember a couple of years ago, it was the last year, there was the happiness index, they do for all countries. And some place like Ecuador came top. Now, Ecuador was a fairly poor country. But when they interviewed people, say, why are you so happy? They said, we're getting on. We could see a future. They were confident that tomorrow was going to be better than today. And I think that's what's been lost here. Throughout the world, England with Brexit, in Europe, Europeans are very unhappy. There's massive unemployment, youth unemployment. There's just so many, quite apart from the issues of immigration and all those kind of terrorism and so forth. It's not a positive age, really.
No, absolutely. Laura Tingle, a few years ago now, wrote a quarterly essay called Great Expectations, where she actually talked about the fact that perhaps we in Australia don't know how lucky we've had it, that we're still a relatively wealthy, well-educated, prosperous society, that we're looking at scapegoating particular people in that society because we have these expectations of what we deserve to have. Do you think that problem, particularly in terms of how people view leadership and what they expect from their leaders, is unrealistic now?
Possibly, except that the whole post-war boom generation, the baby boomer generation, which grew up in that boom, that's the first generation really that what was their great American dream, but then became the great Australian dream, but everyone's dream actually. It's now the China dream, that you will be better off and your children will be better off than you were, your education will be better. This expectations were built in by a post-war generation who had a kind of solution to what had happened in the 1930s, which had led to war. And that shouldn't happen again. We could we can manage capitalism actually in a way that benefits everybody. We all have a stake. It will be better and better. And when that runs into very severe headwinds,
like the global financial crisis, for example.
Like the global financial crisis, and people puzzle where did that come from? We thought we'd solved all that. Yeah. And the leaders seem to have no handle on it whatsoever. And by the way, failure of intellectual leadership, not just political leadership. Because with John Maynard Keynes in the 1930s, 40s, we had Lovell Haiti, Milton Friedman in the 1970s, 80s. These were very effectively captured the consensus, the political consensus. This is how we address this issue. This is how we solve it. Who's anyone listening to now? There's lots of voices out there, but who's the leader, intellectual leader, that's captured the ground and said, you know what we are, you know how we got there, you know how we fix this. And
that's
political leaders don't do it on their own. They need that figure, that intellectual.
Yeah, that kind of garners that momentum in a way.
That's right, and creates the consensus, the political sense concerning us. Right.
Yeah. So, okay, with all these problems and the things that we've been discussing, we could go on for hours, really. What do you think is the problem that leadership is supposed to address?
It's got many problems to address, of course, because I think you said in one of your previous interviews, you are elected as a government to serve all the people. But of course all the people aren't the same, they all have different demands and different requirements, and you can't please all the people. And government has increasing, as you said before, demands placed upon it. Once upon a time it was possible to have small government, it's not possible anymore. But as government really got more than it can actually handle. So political leadership has to, but there's been a bizarre period in Australian politics since 2007.
Yes.
What was that all about, for heaven's sake?
Yeah, I mean, if you'd asked me 15 years ago whether we would have had that number of prime ministers in that quick a short time, you'd go, no, it's not possible in this country, it's not how it works here.
No. Apparently it is.
Yeah, rules are thrown out the window. Yeah.
And you can be, we as political watchers, even us, can be kind of staggered by what seems to be really, really, really insane political judgment from day to day, week to week. Why did you do that? Haven't you got anyone from our class who could advise you on that?
Yeah.
So some of it has to do with the troubled times too, in that an increasing what they call hyper-partisanship in the United States, and the middle disappears.
Yes.
And the middle disappears, you get mad people on either side who take over the conversation. And the most effectively is always cultivate and create a middle ground which isolates your extremes on right and left and holds that middle ground. The middle ground's kind of disappeared, and the leaders either exploit the extremes get a Tony Abbott or Malcolm Roberts, who will exploit the extremes, and that'll be the path to leadership, but it's not a place you can conduct leadership for all people. So someone has to recreate middle ground. Now it's a big task.
Absolutely.
Because of the ideological shifts in the world. No one believes in the left anymore. There's no left. And yet the right answers have failed.
Yes.
So where do we go?
Yeah, very interesting. Very interesting. Professor John Kane, thank you so much for taking the time to come and talk to us today. And thank you for listening. Bye.